Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The shuttle broke through the thick atmosphere of Astris 4, streaking across the sky like a meteor. Inside, Dr. Ethan Gray gripped the armrests of his seat, feeling the familiar pressure of gravity returning. He stared out the window, watching as the planet's surface came into view, gray, cracked, and lifeless, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Once, it had been a paradise. Now, it was just another war-torn wasteland. "You okay, Doc?" A voice crackled through the comm. Ethan turned to see Sergeant Vance, the mission's head of security, glancing at him from across the cabin. Vance was the kind of guy who had seen more combat than most people could imagine and wore his scars like badges. His easy grin was the only thing that hadn't been hardened by years of war. "Yeah," Ethan replied, his voice dry. "Just a broken bar thinking about the reboot?" "About everything." Vance nodded, as if he understood, though Ethan doubted anyone could truly grasp the weight he carried. The shuttle rattled as it descended, the turbulence growing stronger as they neared the surface. Ethan's mind wandered back to the countless reports, the endless data. A planet that reboots itself. A natural wonder, perhaps the last of its kind, able to reset not just its environment but the people who live there. He hadn't believed it at first. Who would? But the evidence had been irrefutable. Ancient ruins that vanished and reappeared with every cycle. Plant life growing back overnight. And then there were the people, those rare survivors who'd experienced the reboot firsthand and emerged. A broken bar changed. The shuttle landed with a jolt, and the crew inside unbuckled. Ethan stood up, his body stiff, and grabbed his pack. The others were already moving. Lana Price, the biologist, was tapping furiously at her tablet, muttering something about preliminary readings. Ethan couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. She reminded him of himself, once, before all the cynicism and loss had taken hold. They stepped out into the barren landscape, the sky a dull, sickly orange. Dust swirled around their feet as they made their way toward the research base, a small outpost that had been constructed by the initial survey team. It looked just as empty and abandoned as the planet itself. "Welcome to paradise," Vance muttered under his breath. Ethan let the comment slide, focusing instead on the task at hand. His team had come to Astris 4 with a single mission: to unlock the mystery of the planet's reboot cycles. There was hope that understanding how the planet could heal itself might offer a solution to other worlds ravaged by war. But for Ethan, the mission was more than just a professional endeavor. It was personal. As they entered the base, the cold, metallic interior was a sharp contrast to the desolation outside. The hum of the air recyclers was the only sound. Ethan dropped his pack by the entrance and headed straight for the central console. The room flickered to life, holographic displays and data streams lighting up the walls. "Everything looks stable," Lana said, leaning over his shoulder. "The reboot hasn't started yet, but the signs are all there." "We're close," Ethan nodded, scanning the information. The planet's atmosphere was in flux, subtle shifts in pressure and temperature indicating the start of the next cycle. The reboots were unpredictable, occurring anywhere between decades to centuries apart. But once they began, the changes were rapid and all-encompassing. "Let's get to work," Ethan said, turning to his team. "We need to gather as much data as possible before the cycle begins." The hours passed in a blur of activity. Lana took soil and plant samples, while Vance and his security team patrolled the perimeter. Ethan monitored the environmental changes, noting the increasing levels of energy surging through the planet's core. It was as if the planet was preparing itself for rebirth. He glanced at the others, his mind drifting. They were all here for different reasons, some for scientific curiosity, others for fame or fortune. But for Ethan, it was about redemption. He'd lost so much over the years: his family, his sense of purpose. This mission was his last chance to find something that made sense in a universe that had gone mad. The first tremor hit just before midnight. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Ethan felt it in his bones. He stood up from the console and motioned to the others. "It's starting," he said quietly. They gathered around the central display as the ground beneath them rumbled again, stronger this time. Outside, the sky darkened, the orange hue giving way to a deep, unnatural red. The planet's surface began to crack and shift, as if something beneath the ground was waking up. Lana's voice was barely above a whisper. "It's beautiful." Ethan wasn't so sure. There was something unsettling about the way the planet transformed, as if it was erasing its history with every quake and tremor. Ruins that had stood for centuries crumbled to dust, rivers rerouted themselves, and the air grew thick with a scent of earth and ozone. The team watched in awe as the landscape around them changed. Trees that had long since withered began to sprout anew, their leaves a vibrant green. Flowers bloomed where moments before there had been only dust. It was as if time itself was reversing. But the strangest part was how Ethan felt. It wasn't just the environment that was changing, it was him. He felt lighter, stronger, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. His thoughts, usually clouded with doubt and regret, were clearer, sharper. "Do you feel that?" he asked, turning to Lena. She nodded, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's like a broken bar, we're part of it. Like the planet is rebooting us too." Ethan's heart raced. This was what the survivors had described it as, the feeling of renewal, of being reborn alongside the planet. But as incredible as it was, he couldn't shake the sense of unease. What did it mean for them? Would they lose themselves in the process? The tremors subsided, leaving behind a transformed world. The once dead landscape was now teeming with life, but the sense of tranquility that followed was unsettling. It was as if the planet had reset, wiping away the scars of war and time. Yet something deeper remained, an ancient force, perhaps, that had orchestrated the reboot. Over the next few days, the team worked tirelessly, gathering samples and running tests. Ethan spent hours poring over the data, trying to make sense of it all. But no matter how much information they collected, the answers remained elusive. "We're missing something," Lana said one evening as they sat around the base's common area. "The planet isn't just healing itself, it's healing us." Ethan looked up from his notes. "What do you mean?" "I've been running bioscans," she explained. "Our cells are regenerating faster than normal. Old injuries are disappearing. Even our mental states are improving." Vance said his nightmares have stopped. Ethan frowned. He hadn't noticed it at first, but she was right. His old knee injury, the one that had plagued him for years, was gone. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the constant ache in his chest, the grief, the anger had faded. "What if this is the planet's way of ensuring its survival?" Lana continued. "It doesn't just reboot the environment, it reboots everything, including the people who live here." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. If the planet could reset them, erase their pasts, what did that mean for their futures? Would they even be the same people by the time the reboot was complete? Ethan pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. There was still so much they didn't understand, and with every passing day, the planet's changes grew more extreme. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. The base was quiet, but outside, Astris 4 was alive with transformation. Every hour brought new changes to the landscape. What had been barren just days ago was now teeming with alien flora. The once polluted rivers ran clear, and strange, glowing fungi sprouted along the edges of the base. The planet's natural rhythm was a constant hum in his mind, as if Astris 4 was whispering to him, urging him to let go. He sat alone in the common area, staring at the holographic display of the data they'd collected so far. No matter how much information they gathered, it all pointed to the same conclusion: the planet wasn't just rebooting itself, it was fundamentally altering them too. He'd felt the effects already: the physical rejuvenation, the emotional clarity, but it wasn't until Lena had pointed it out that he truly understood the gravity of what was happening. The door to the common area slid open, and Vance walked in, his heavy boots barely making a sound on the metal floor. "Can't sleep either," Huh? Ethan shook his head. Too much on my mind. Vance grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler and sat down across from him. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them was comfortable, almost peaceful. Vance had always been the grounding force in the team, a steadfast, reliable, the kind of man who took things as they came. But even he was starting to show signs of change. You ever think about what comes after this? Vance asked, breaking the silence. I mean, what happens when we leave? Ethan didn't answer right away. He'd been avoiding that question for days. The longer they stayed, the more it felt like leaving was impossible. Not because they couldn't, but because Asterisk 4 wouldn't let them. The planet had its grip on them, subtly changing their perceptions, their emotions, making it harder to imagine life outside its influence. I don't know, Ethan finally said. It's hard to say what we'll be like when we go. But I don't think we'll ever be the same. Vance nodded thoughtfully, taking a long sip of water. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. I've been carrying a lot of baggage for a long time. Feels like this place is giving me a chance to drop it. Ethan understood what he meant. The weight of his past had been a constant presence in his life for years, but now, here on this strange planet, it felt a broken bar lighter. The memories were still there, but they didn't hurt as much. It was as if Asterisk 4 had scrubbed the edges off his grief, leaving only the lessons he'd learned. Lana appeared in the doorway, her hair disheveled, eyes wide. You guys need to see this. They followed her outside, into the cool night air. The planet's 2 moons hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the transformed landscape. But it wasn't the moons or the glowing plants that had her so worked up. In the distance, a massive structure had emerged from the ground, towering above the trees like a monument to a forgotten age. It wasn't there yesterday, Lana said breathlessly. I checked the satellite images. It's like the planet just a broken bar grew it. The structure was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. It was composed of smooth, metallic surfaces that shimmered under the moonlight, and strange symbols similar to the ones they'd seen in the ancient ruins were etched into its sides. It was both alien and familiar, like a relic of a time long past, yet somehow connected to the present. Ethan's heart raced as he stared at the structure. This was it, the missing piece they'd been searching for, the key to understanding Asterisk 4's reboot process. We need to get a closer look, he said, already moving toward the transport vehicle. This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for. Vance and Lana followed without hesitation. Within minutes, they were driving toward the structure, the vehicle's lights cutting through the thickening fog that clung to the ground. The air grew colder the closer they got, and an inexplicable sense of anticipation buzzed in the back of Ethan's mind. When they reached the base of the structure, they stepped out of the vehicle, their boots sinking slightly into the soft, newly grown earth. Up close, the tower was even more impressive. It stretched high into the sky, disappearing into the clouds, and the symbols etched into its surface seemed to pulse with a faint, rhythmic glow. It feels her broken bar alive, Lana whispered, reaching out to touch the metal. Her fingers hovered just above the surface, as if afraid to make contact. Ethan felt it too. The structure wasn't just a remnant of the past, it was an active part of the planet's ecosystem, a living, breathing component of Asterisk 4's mysterious power. He stepped forward and placed his hand on the metal. It was cool to the touch, but there was a subtle vibration, like a pulse, thrumming beneath the surface. Suddenly, the symbols flared to life, casting the area in a soft, golden light. The ground beneath them rumbled, and a doorway appeared in the side of the structure, seamlessly opening as if inviting them inside. What the hell? Vance muttered, taking a step back. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but he couldn't turn away. This was what they'd been waiting for. The answers they needed were inside that structure. He glanced at Lana, who looked just as mesmerized as he felt. I'm going in, he said. Vance hesitated for a moment before nodding. I've got your back. The 3 of them stepped through the doorway, the air inside cool and still. The walls were lined with the same glowing symbols, casting just enough light for them to see the interior. The hallway stretched out before them, curving upward in a gentle spiral. They moved cautiously, the silence only broken by the soft hum of the structure. As they ascended, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not by something physical, but by the planet itself. It was as if Asterisk 4 was guiding them, showing them what they needed to see. When they reached the top, the hallway opened into a large chamber. At the center was a massive, crystalline structure, pulsating with energy. It floated above the ground, suspended by some unseen force, and the symbols on its surface shifted and changed, as if reacting to their presence. Lana approached it slowly, her eyes wide with awe. "This broken bar, this is it. This is the core of the reboot." Ethan felt a wave of understanding wash over him. The planet's power wasn't just natural, it was controlled, directed by this crystalline core. It was the reason the planet could heal itself, the reason it could reboot everything, even the people who lived here. But as he stared at the core, a new realization dawned on him. The reboot process wasn't perfect. It wasn't just erasing the past, it was rewriting it. And with every reboot, something was lost. Memories, identities, entire histories were being wiped away, replaced with something new. He took a step back, his mind racing. "We need to leave." "Now?" Lana looked at him, confused. "What?" "But we've just It's not safe," Ethan interrupted, his voice tight with urgency. "This planet isn't just rebooting itself, it's changing us. If we stay here any longer, we won't be the same people we were when we landed." Bence's expression hardened. "You think the planet's trying to reset us?" Ethan nodded, his pulse quickening. "Yes. And if we don't get out before the next reboot, we'll lose everything that makes us who we are." Lana hesitated, glancing back at the core. "But the data." "Screw the data," Vance said, stepping between her and the core. "Ethan's right. We're leaving." Reluctantly, Lana nodded, and they hurried back down the spiral hallway, the structure around them thrumming with energy. As they stepped outside, the ground beneath them shook violently. The reboot was beginning again, faster and more intense than before. They raced to the transport, the landscape around them shifting and changing with alarming speed. Trees grew and withered in seconds, the sky flickered between day and night, and the ground cracked and reformed beneath their feet. "Go, go, go!" Vance shouted as they piled into the vehicle. Ethan floored the accelerator, the vehicle lurching forward as the world around them continued to transform. The base came into view just as another tremor rocked the ground, sending cracks spidering across the earth. They reached the shuttle just in time. The engines roared to life, and they lifted off, leaving the rapidly changing planet behind. As they broke through the atmosphere, Ethan watched Asterisk 4 shrink into the distance, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what they'd left behind. The planet would continue to reboot, erasing and reshaping itself in an endless cycle. But for Ethan, one thing was clear: no matter how many times the planet reset, the people who had experienced its power would never be the same.